I'm Rebecca Garrett Pace.
I'm Mitchell Boone, and you're listening to The Day After Sunday.
A brief but nerdy conversation about yesterday's worship at White Rock United Methodist Church.
We talk about what caught our attention, stories we forgot to tell, and ways that we saw the Holy Spirit moving among us. Good morning, Rebecca and Phil.
Good morning.
Hello, y'all.
How are we?
Good.
Yeah?
Lovely.
Happy Star Wars Day.
Today's Star Wars Day?
May the 4th, that's right.
May the 4th, yeah. May the 4th.
You know, I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Yeah, I know. We can move past that.
This is part of so I made a decision. There are two things that I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and watch all the Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to rewatch all of Breaking Bad. What do you think?
Ooh. I have not watched Breaking Bad, and that's one that my wife and I keep debating. Should we go and just try to do it again? Because we've never done it.
You've never watched it?
Mm-mm.
I watched the first 2 episodes. It was too much for me. It was way too intense. I do not want...
We couldn't get through the first season. We tried twice and just couldn't get through it. I don't know why.
It's not for me.
Interesting. Wow.
Great British Baking Show is much more my thing than Breaking Bad.
For that too.
Well, I just finished season 3 of Westworld last night, and so it's not that Breaking Bad's too much for me. I just never got into it for some reason.
Yeah.
God. Hey, Phil, I think your mic's a little low.
Oh, might not.
I would adjust you, but...
No, we're good. Here we go. Better? Yes, better? Yes?
Yeah,
yes.
you sound a little stronger.
There we go. Sorry about that.
So,
your mic matches your shirt, Phil. I like it.
Does. A good thing I don't have like a blue screen going on behind me. It'd be very awkward. But yeah, I'm trying a new mic today, so maybe this is a bad time to try a new mic. But
no, we're good.
We're good. So Phil has been jumping in and helping out on Sunday mornings here at White Rock, running cameras and being second cameraman. But yesterday, Phil,
you were first cameraman.
You were the cameraman. You were it all. You were a producer and all sorts of stuff.
Well, so usually Dexter does that, and I woke up yesterday morning to a text that his wife was going in labor. So it was like, oh, I guess we'll figure this out. But shout out to Dexter because he rushed up to the church and got everything set up, which was amazing. And it went from being second cameraman to producer, audio, and double cameraman. And I don't know how people do it. That's not my training at all. I do a lot of piddling with it, but it's a lot going on at once. And so if you were watching yesterday or streaming with us, then if somebody was trying to talk and their audio wasn't on, then that was me because I was like moving a camera and trying to like adjust the audio and stuff. So
you did great.
90 seconds, a 90-second tutorial.
That's true.
He gave you 90 seconds to talk to him.
From the hospital. I called him. I was like, hey, can you chat? And he's like, yeah, you have 90 seconds. Go. Oh, 90 seconds. Cool. Good. Thanks.
No, you did great. And I think it just goes to show, again, like we say so often, our White Rock community is just so like grateful and flexible, and even when we worship in person, there are all kinds of imperfections that we just kind of take in stride. So
yeah,
I think it's great.
Totally.
No, it was great. It was really cool. It was a fun experience and something very new for me, but it was cool.
So yesterday was how many Sundays was it? It's the third Sunday after Easter, is that right?
Fourth.
It's the fourth Sunday of Easter, of Eastertide.
Sunday of Eastertide.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we were focusing on Jesus the Good Shepherd and Jesus the Gate, which is an interesting parallel.
Yeah, it's better that this Sunday is called the Good Shepherd Sunday rather
instead
than
of Gate Sunday.
Good Gate.
Jesus the
metaphors.
Yeah.
It's a challenging text. Obviously, the Pharisees don't even pick up on what he's saying. You know what? I was reading this text, and the whole Sunday revolves around sheep, and I think we're going to get into Psalm 23. But I ran into Reverend Mike Bachman's take on this on Text Week, and he believed that Jesus was being sarcastic with everyone, which is a really interesting move.
What leads him to that conclusion?
That obviously sheep are not as attuned to the shepherd's voice as Jesus is saying in that kind of a parable, that sheep are prone to wandering off and following whoever will lead them, and that Jesus is trying to make a joke that goes over the Pharisees' heads.
Huh.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's an interesting take, especially if you think about how influential the I am statements of Jesus are in the Gospel of John, and how many books have been written about the 7 I am statements or whatever. To think of it that two of them are, or at least one of them here, are being sarcastic is an interesting take.
Well, and
they're
that
all being sarcastic.
Maybe.
Yesterday I couldn't help but keep getting the Handel Messiah piece, All We Like Sheep, stuck in my head. And I went back and listened to it this morning because I haven't sung it in years. But Handel is kind of poking fun at it too, interestingly enough. Like the way that he composed that piece, I mean, the vocal lines go astray, literally. All we like sheep have gone astray. And it's just like you wander all around, you lose tonic, you don't know where you're going. And then it's very picturesque of how dense sheep can be, I suppose.
Totally.
And yeah, it's interesting that parallel happened.
I mean, they're ornery. Like in this writing that Mike, I guess he interviewed some shepherd out in West Texas who says like sheep are always looking for a way to die. Like that, They're either like to kill themselves or to just get trapped or something. Like they're just like, they're chaotic, they're messy, they're all over the place, and the work of a shepherd is actually really, really complicated and hard.
Maybe that's the whole point of using dual metaphors in the same narrative as well, right? Like we're dense enough that we'll just go right with it. The fact that there's you can be both a gate and a sheep, or a shepherd, I mean, at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Mitchell, I think that top 5 phrases I've ever heard you use in a sermon are 100 sheep and 1 dude with a stick, aka hipster Where's Waldo.
That was epic.
Yeah, he did look like a hipster. Well, I mean, we're in New Zealand, so everyone kind of looks like a hipster. But this dude looked like a hipster Where's Waldo for sure.
That was hilarious to me.
Oh man,
probably some American that like sold everything and was like, I'm gonna just move to New Zealand, and got a crappy job being a shepherd and is stuck on the side of a mountain for like 2 years until his visa runs out.
I mean, there are days, right? There are days that doesn't sound terrible.
No, well, I mean, I would do that right now in a heartbeat. You tell me I could go live on the side of a mountain in New Zealand right now, I think I'd be like, how long do I have to sign up for? I'd probably do it. It'd be pretty awesome.
Then again, you have to deal with sheep, so
yeah, I don't know what I'm doing there. Barely know what I'm doing here. Yeah, it was a wild ride, literally, because I didn't know how to drive that car either. So
sure, yeah.
Well, if you didn't hear that story, you can check out the sermon on our Facebook page or YouTube channel. Yep. But the whole Sunday revolves around shepherds and sheep, and our first reading was in Psalm 23, the classic. I'm going to a funeral and I'm probably going to hear this psalm read, right? Like it is read. It's probably the most well-known psalm.
Absolutely. Oh, by far.
Is it even close?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, distant second probably is like Psalm 121.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and it's interesting. So sheep and shepherd metaphors are prolific in hymns and songs and children's lessons, and I thought Victoria did a great job with children's time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I chose Psalm 23 partly because people find it so familiar, but also because, like you said a couple weeks ago, it is one of those scriptures that we can feel so familiar with it, we're not actually listening to what it has to say.
Yeah, totally.
We may even have it memorized, and we don't really listen to what it says.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a prime example of like kind of glossing over it and not really paying attention, being like, oh, this psalm's like to provide us comfort, but have we really probed it and really taken it piece by piece and really try to examine it?
Yeah, I think that's the thing about the metaphors that are present there, is that when you do hear it so repetitively, you just gloss over the metaphor aspect of it, and the imagery really is pretty fantastic. But sorry, we have a child here that keeps wanting to get involved in the podcast, and
that's all right.
He's not even quite 2 yet, so I'm not sure he's quite ready for podcasting. But yeah, I think that's the problem, right? Like, and you did allude to it, Mitchell, that's the difficult thing with reading texts that are so familiar. But the imagery really is so powerful in Psalm 23, and obviously, you know, the hard part too is that we don't. This isn't normal day for us, right? Like in the text, it probably was a more common thing for people, but it's hard for me to set my put myself in the situation of what it means to be wandering through valleys and roaming around and shepherds and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more difficult to make it more modern and understand it from a modern context.
Yeah, that would be a really neat spiritual activity. That's one of the things that I offered on our women's retreat last fall was an activity where people could rewrite Psalms, kind of with no rules, with no judgment. Like you can't do it wrong. It's just it's your poetry. It's your sharing your thoughts. And so it'd be interesting to rewrite Psalm 23. Just pulling out the themes, but making it applicable to something that is more understandable to our way of life instead of
like
being
an
a
urban
shepherd.
setting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, that'd be good.
Urban 23.
Urban 23.
That
Urban
sounds like
Psalm.
that sounds like the next blog post. I think I'll get on that today.
Oh yeah, you should like tap a couple people to write it from their perspective and like
Yeah.
that'd be cool. I like it. Yeah, I think the text is it's so familiar, but it is deep. It provides this space to really see God as companion that I think is missing in a lot of it's present in the Psalms, but in the Hebrew Bible in general, God is like near and near and dear and companion and like fellow sojourner is kind of lacking, to be honest. We got God kind of distant and kind of intervening, I feel like, a lot in the Hebrew Bible, but here in this passage in the psalmist work, it's incredible to see the poetry of God being like so engaged with the suffering in the world. And I think it's an important reminder in today's context that we do have a God that is like deeply rooted in our pain and suffering and the darkness that we may be feeling right now.
Yeah, I think the intimate is a good word that I think of when I think of Psalm 23.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard this, obviously, as we've already established, none of us are shepherds. So if you are a shepherd, you feel free to correct
Call in.
our learnings. But I've read these reflections from people that say, every line in Psalm 23, though it is poetic, has a direct tie to something that's practical and protective of the sheep. So, you anoint my head with oil. Shepherds do that to sheep to keep like insects away, to keep pests away, to keep their skin protected. Like it's like Mitchell, I think you said earlier, it's like a sunscreen. It's protecting. So it's keeping the sheep healthy. So we think of like, anointing with oil, that's just something you go and get done symbolically. You make a cross on somebody's forehead and pray for them. But no, this was actually like health benefits 101 for keeping your sheep, free of lice, free of pests, all this kind of stuff.
Well, and yeah, the if we think of animals that travel a lot and have like long hair, the hair gets matted, and like the worst places for those mats to exist would be look at Phil's stuff with those,
Phil, you need a shepherd to anoint your head with oil.
That's all I needed. If I had a good shepherd.
To be able to like see, to be able to be led, you can't have your hair in your eyes. And so like, yeah, there's this notion that if you anoint the head with oil, you can keep the mats down and out of the eyes so that the sheep can be led. Yeah.
Not to again jump metaphors, but what an interesting thing too. What good is a gate if you can't see, right? If your hair is matted in front of your face, then it doesn't matter if Jesus is the gate if you can't, or
Well, even if you're in the gate but you can't even make sense of where you are, does it even matter?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's good.
And
then rods and staffs and all that, right? And
yeah.
Familiar with that's the image we have of shepherds. They got
and also too, you talk a lot about this. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I mean, just such an incredible, powerful phrase that we forget too often because we want to be. If we're extending the metaphor, well, Jesus may be the gate, but we want to be the fence. We want to be the ones that keep people out.
We want to tag people.
Yeah, we want to keep the right people in and keep the right people out. And such an incredible reminder. I have other sheep. You don't know all my pastures. So you focus on being part of my flock and let me focus on being the shepherd of all the other flocks.
Yeah, and John has some very specific exclusivist language, so it's to hear this in the Gospel of John, I think is even more powerful. It's not bubbling up in the Gospel of Luke, where we kind of see this like wide open, Jesus is going to come and like make everyone love each other and it's going to be good. John's very specific, and there is a lot of exclusivist language in John. So when we do get a glimpse of this inclusivity in John, we really have to pay attention. We can't read into that text, and I think we do it all the time. We conflate Matthew 25 with that somehow there are goats going to get in, or the wolf in sheep's clothing is going to get in, and while there is an aspect of having to pay attention and be on alert, there is no indication that Jesus is ranking the sheep that are in the pasture.
Yeah.
In fact, the only folks that we are warned about are folks who would take advantage of sheep. And I think that that's just a really good reminder.
Yeah, there are no warnings to be suspicious of your fellow sheep.
No, none.
Yeah.
Bandits and thieves in this particular metaphor. Yeah.
And I know every metaphor falls short eventually, and I think this is maybe a segue, Mitchell, to kind of what you started comparing the thieves and bandits to in your sermon yesterday. But it's kind of tricky playing out the metaphor. Like, if we are the sheep, then really who are the bandits and those who come to kill and destroy in the midst of this? And do you remember what you said in your sermon yesterday? Do you want to review what you said about that?
About thieves and bandits?
Yeah.
And specifically what's happening in our context now?
Yeah.
Around meatpacking plants?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look, Jesus is very clear here. He says, thieves and bandits, they have a specific way of doing things. It is to kill and destroy and to steal. That is what thieves and bandits do. That is in their nature, right? That's it, kind of inherently their mode of operation in the world. And when I was like trying to think of a modern day example, a real time example, I couldn't help but go back to all these meatpacking plants that are being like opened up full force, right? It's full throttle on these meatpacking plants, and what's happening is all these folks are getting really, really sick. And they're getting really, really sick because no one's giving them PPE. And the chances of recourse are very small because most of these folks are undocumented. We can look at Amarillo, Texas right now. They had to send the COVID-19 strike force into Amarillo specifically because there's a meatpacking plant there where everyone's getting sick. Same thing in Sioux City, Iowa. So these like smaller cities where we're seeing outbreaks are all based off of folks' need to generate revenue from meatpacking. And if we think it's about employees getting money, I think we're falling short of really understanding what's happening. And I think that there are folks in the world who only see people as dollar signs and profit streams. And Jesus is very clear that he provides an alternative to that understanding in that life. An abundant life is not forcing folks into meatpacking plants without PPE so we can have cheap meat and people who own them can remain wealthy. That's my hot take about it.
To me, it was when you said it, I thought it was like a really powerful and kind of a prophetic statement in the midst of where we are, but it made me think of thieves and bandits in the form of systems, right, rather than just totally individuals,
institutions. Yeah,
right. And to me, like, that fits the metaphor way better, right? Because as sheep, we can look around and recognize other people as sheep, whatever, but then are people going to be the thieves and bandits, or is it going to be something that's way more powerful than just an individual person, and that's like systems of oppression essentially, or even not just systems of oppression? Well, it probably is like ideology sometimes even, right? Like these are these systems that are the ones that really do come to kill and destroy, even though they get masked as something that's going to bring about prosperity, And so I think holding that up against this idea of what Jesus says about abundant life is a really powerful comparison, especially given our climate and context right now.
Have you all read C.S. Lewis, The Last Battle?
I have not.
Yes, I did, but it's been a very long time.
Well, it's been a long time for me too. I need to go back and reread it. But whenever I hear passages like this that invite me to step back from the judgment seat and to let God do God's work, I just remember this scene in The Last Battle where there's this creature that shows up and is confronted by Aslan, the savior figure, and they're like, "What am I doing here?" And Aslan's like, "Well, you served me. This is where you belong." And the creature says, "I didn't serve you. I spent my whole life serving this other god." And Aslan said, "But you were doing good, and I know that anything that does good for the world is in my name, even if you call me by a different name." And I just think that's such an incredible perspective, right, for us to think, and quite revolutionary for the time that C.S. Lewis was writing.
Yeah.
To be reminded that we can't prescribe what names people call God by, that God accepts.
Yeah, and if we not to reduce God down to one thing, but if we take First John seriously, that God is love, then and we see love exist, the most pure, the most a complete love that we can comprehend in others, who do not show up in our churches. How are we to extract or remove them from the fold, or a fold that God is deeply concerned with? It's this whole notion of like fruit of the Spirit. If we see the fruits in other people who do not proclaim Christ, the question I think that we have to answer is, then where do these fruits come from? And if these fruits are good and we can tell that they are good and genuine and holy, how do we reconcile that? And too often we reconcile it by saying, sorry, you're really great, but you're out. And you're
your
out.
fruit may be lovely, but don't bring your fruit in my pasture.
Don't bring your forbidden fruit in here.
That's right.
Don't bring that in here. And I think that's even more challenging. It's easier to be like, that person is so far removed from God, we can totally see. But when we're really challenged is when folks are genuine and are bearing fruit, but they don't believe like us. It puts us in a really awkward position. And unfortunately, historically, we still kind of try to cut them out, to try to create parameters or tag them differently than us. And I think that identity piece is so challenging when we really stop to think about it.
Yeah, I thought that was another really good thing you said too, was this idea of how we base our identity kind of like as a separation, or how we aren't like other people. Like we figure out who we are by othering others, and I thought that was a pretty powerful aspect to really do some self-analyzing, to really figure out like, what is my identity rooted in versus what is your identity rooted in, and yours and yours, and like there's just a really strong piece to that you brought about. And I thought that was a really great tie to a really complex text, right? Like this is a difficult text to preach, because you could go a million directions with it, and I wasn't expecting this to be the way you took this sermon, and I thought it was a really powerful way to wrap kind of this idea of identity. So I was, as I was mixing things, I was thought that was really good.
Yeah, I mean, we're up against it, but I am curious, like, how do you all figure out identity? Like when you think of your own identity, as a Christian, let's say, where do you derive that identity from? Like what aspect of your faith, or how do you get there, is I guess what I'm saying. Like, is it your primary identity? I mean,
sure,
I like to say it is mine, but I mean, I waffle. But I'm curious, like, how do we claim that identity without contrasting? Is really the loaded question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a great, and it can be a loaded question, because I'm just thinking, how would I, if I were introducing myself to a group of folks that didn't know me, I probably wouldn't lead with, I'm a Christian.
Follower of Jesus.
Right.
My name's Rebecca.
And I part of that is sad to me, that I am not totally comfortable with the label Christian. But that's not because I'm ashamed of the work that Jesus is doing in me. It just feels like that label falls short. And so I feel like I'm grasping at a label that could be more. And so then I try to talk through it, and I try to put too many words around it, and I say, well, I'm a child of God. I try to follow Jesus's compassion and yada yada. And they're like, so you're a Christian? And I'm like, well, okay, yes, I am, but I feel like that word can mean so many different things, right? And can be turned to, when I've talked with friends who don't consider themselves Christians, they assume that we're judgmental, and unfortunately, they're usually right.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I think it, and I don't remember where I got challenged by this from, something that I read recently or heard or something, but um, even we use our, obviously this happens all too often. We use our religions to parse ourselves out and others and identify ourselves. And again, like I don't want to say it's a bad thing because I do take my faith seriously and I view that as part of my identity. But like if I started with my common sense of humanity, right? That like my identity is rooted in being a human, being a creature that was created. And when you just said child of God, I thought, what an even better way to start there, right? If I recognize my identity as a child of God, well then my child of Godness is not identified or dependent upon somebody else's othering child of godness, right? Like we are all children of God under this same umbrella. And
Yeah.
so rather than like parsing I'm a Christian here and you're a Jew there and you're a Hindu there, like no, it's that we're all children of God and or we're all human, right? And so we're all in this together. And so I'm not distinguishing myself as like, well, I'm America, American first, wait, American, America first, like, and you're over there. No, like we're all human and we're all in this together, and that we really do influence and not just influence, but like we play a role in each other's lives whether we like it or not, and
Mm.
we just can't disregard that. And so I think my identity so often is rooted in my Christian faith because I am a pastor, but also I'm challenging and trying to like push myself to not let it be reduced to that.
Yeah, reductionism is
Hmm.
key. Mitchell, what about you?
Well, I just keep thinking about Phil's imago Dayness, like bringing that into the world. I think that's good. I think there is something peculiar about being Christian, and I don't want to say that it's all the same because that's an affront to Christianity, but it's also to world religions that
Totally.
practice very beautiful, mindful things, and so I don't want to reduce it down to saying we're all on the same path, approaching the same God. But I do think the commonality in our humanity is really important. And when I start there, when I say, okay, we're all waking up and we're all breathing and we're all
Mm.
struggling, I can form an identity that also respects that fundamental nature
Yep.
of us all. And when on my good days, when I wake up and I realize that, then I don't need the differences of others to define who I am, and I can define who I am based off of the community that I'm a part of and the kind of faith that I follow. And I don't need there to be a bunch of goats around for me to feel like a sheep. And I think that that's the challenge, to wake up and see the commonality between us all, because it's so easy to wake up and not feel that, and then I'm having a day where I need other folks, whether that's political party or nationality or folks who live in different parts of Dallas or strangers, and whatever it is, I can fall into that trap um far easier. It's a far easier trap to fall into if I'm not waking up and realizing the commonality between everyone. So yeah.
And the metaphorical waking up too. I think you were talking about literally waking up and starting your day, but I love that language of we are all in the process of waking up, which
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
which is
yeah.
very Buddhist as well.
Totally. I mean, we wake up every morning, but all of a sudden, if we can take on some sort of like posture of identity not being you know I guess solved or created by what others are, then you can kind of wake up every day a little bit better, and it gets into sanctification and this process of like becoming more and more aware of God and the Holy Spirit and all that good stuff. But yeah, that was wow, we went pretty far down there. It's time to come back for some air.
Well, I was going to say too, there's also the notion for me of you can have identity without having the responsibility placed on yourself. So Shelley Ross preached a sermon a couple years ago when you were on paternity leave, Mitchell, that I still have this note on my bulletin board in my office, that she challenged us to think of identities that were affirming our image of God without being attached to our what we have performed and achieved. So I wrote down, I am loved, I am imperfect, and I am enough. And those two are identities that don't depend on our performance and our putting forth anything.
Right.
I think that's really important now when so many of us are not producing like we're used to and having to rethink what jobs are. And, I think so many of us are just, we've identified ourselves by what we create and what we produce and what we churn out, right? Like meatpacking plants. We're back to meatpacking plants, right? And this is challenging that for all of us.
Yeah. 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 What part of our identity is just inherent, and can we affirm the essence or the nature of one another before we value or place judgment on output or byproduct? And I think man, we're getting, actually I'd say we're getting better at it, because we're getting forced to do that. We're not,
That's right.
It's not really, there's not an option. We kind of have to extend grace across the board as much as we can to one another, to strangers. I mean, I'm far more compassionate when I walk into a grocery store. I'm far more compassionate when someone shows up late on one of my Zoom calls. I'm far more compassionate when someone gets mad at me for not responding to an email. I mean, I'm just far more compassionate across the board. And I'm wondering, like, maybe this is a spot where we can actually learn and pay attention to, because it's gonna, it's gonna change again, and we're gonna be lulled back into this, like, value folks for what they can do or what they can produce, especially for us. But I wonder if we can, like, drag this compassion with us into the new world, because we're gonna need it. This is the longest podcast we've ever done.
That's what happens when you invite me on. It just gets crazy.
Mitchell, I don't think that's true. Our Thanksgiving podcast was way longer than this.
Wow, yeah, that was a very special pod. I can't wait for the next one. Next Thanksgiving pod. We're at 31 minutes. Wow. Good work.
Congratulations, if y'all are still listening.
That's right.
Yeah. Phil, it's awesome to have you on. Maybe we should just have you become a regular or something.
Well, I'm glad to be
here.
At
least be in worship for a while. So
that's right.
Yep.
You let me know. I'm happy to join whenever.
Awesome. Well, it's good to be with you all. And if you're listening, subscribe, and we can't wait to catch up with you later.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye. Grace and peace, y'all.
You're listening to a podcast recorded at White Rock United Methodist Church in the heart of East Dallas. For more information, you can find us at wrumc.org. And make sure you stay subscribed to this channel to stay up to date with all of our content.